Hello, my name is Dr. Carrie Hepburn, and I am a public school educator from the St. Louis area. I've taught and worked in public school education for 20 years. About 13 of those years were in the classroom, and the last 7 of those years were in curriculum instruction and assessment. In curriculum instruction and assessment, I worked with early childhood through high school. And then now I'm an educational consultant for a company called Compass PD. And I work with early childhood, all the way from early childhood to high school, and then also in higher education on their curriculum instruction assessment practices. So I'm really excited to be here at the Nebraska Literacy Conference with you. I'm sorry that it's virtual, but that's okay. Wonderful things can happen through the screen. I wanted to just let you know that I present just a little bit differently than a lot of people. I don't use PowerPoint presentations. I don't like PowerPoint presentations when I sit through meetings, and so I don't use them. I will build anchor charts in front of you using my document camera. So that might seem just a little bit odd, but that's what I do when I'm in person or when I'm working with administrators or college professors or students. So I work with all of those levels and pretty much stick with the same model. I build anchor charts in front of people and I talk about them as I'm teaching them and modeling them. So let's get started. Welcome to the power of qualitative data. I wanted to just give you a moment to have my information. I'm moving this around. I apologize for that. My information. So if you want to reach out to me, I love to talk with people. So on Twitter, you can find me at Carrie Hepburn. You can also find me at Compass PD on Twitter. You can find me at Carrie Hepburn on Instagram, Carrie Hepburn Educational Consultant on Facebook. You can find us at Compass PD on Facebook. And my email address is carrie@compasspd.com. Reach out if you have questions, if you want to talk through things, if you need help, just let me know. All right. I am really excited about this topic, and I'm really excited about this topic because very rarely do we talk about qualitative data. We always talk about quantitative data. And actually, if we take the time to study qualitative data, we can really learn a lot. And it's really nice to be able to look at qualitative data that you're gathering and the quantitative data that you have and correlate it and see, are they matching? Or is one thing telling me something that the other one is not? And so it can lead to some really interesting conversations and some really beautiful work. Let's get started. Let's start with our objectives. So based on today's time together, we will know, how about I get that? We're going to know different types of qualitative data. You're going to understand like what it looks like, what's it telling us, and decide like use this information to be able to impact your curriculum, instruction, and assessment in your classroom, in your building, or in your district. So I want you to just take a second and think about what you already feel really good about when you look at these objectives. What do you already know or feel really confident in? And take a second and think like, what are you most excited to learn about? Take just a moment to do that. Great. Let's do just a really quick definition of terms. Qualitative data, what is that? Well, it's the data that's not really like a number or a score. It isn't red, yellow, green. It's not 3, 2, 1, A, B, C, D. It's really more observational. You gather qualitative data through observation, through surveys, through conversations, through interviews, through noticing things. Some of the qualitative data I might gather as a building leader or as a district leader is just studying, what do I notice on the walls? Our real estate in our classroom are our walls. So how is that being used? Is it really purposeful? Am I seeing things that have been created by the students or the teacher and they've done that together? Or am I seeing lots of purchased kind of things? It's just interesting to note, an observation to make. Tells me a lot. Another type of data that we use a lot is qualitative data. This is the data with numbers like scores, those kind of things. Typically the things that we think about when we think about data in education, percentages, number of students mastered, or number of students in RTI. We think about qualitative data a lot, right? Today, as I talk to you about some things, some different types of qualitative data to gather and like what it's telling us and what you can do with that, I want you to know that I kind of correlated this with John Hattie's visible, I'll switch this out, John Hattie's visible learning, like his effect size. And so if this is new to you, here's what I want to tell you is John Hattie says, if the effect size is 0.40, that means it's 1 year's worth of growth, an average year. If it's less than 0.40, it's less than a year's worth of growth. If it's greater than 0.40, it's greater than a year's worth of growth. All of the things I'm going to ask you to start thinking about studying are going to be things that are greater, and some far greater than a year. So let's get started. Here's how I was thinking about this. I was thinking, like, what do I want you to study? How does it look? And what kind of tips can I give you to help you like be able to do the thing that I'm telling you that I want you to study? All right, so you'll get the hang of it. The first thing that I study when I go into classrooms is that every minute is precious, like that there's an urgency to the work. The students see the value in what they're doing. And you can notice that when a teacher's teaching. You can notice that through their body language, through their inflection of their voice. You can notice that in the students' like attentiveness to the teaching and their immediateness to get right to work. So this is I went a little bit fast there. This is how it looks, like students get right to work. And you'll notice that they're actually putting in effort in the work that they're doing. They know that what they're doing is important. And so some tips to make sure that every moment is precious, that there is an urgency to do the work, is that the work is real world and relevant, right? The materials, so I want to talk to you about real world and relevant. One of the things that when I first started teaching, I would do, because I thought I would have to prove that students earned a certain grade, was in reading workshop, I would give packets of comprehension questions. And then I would score those packets, and that would be part of their grade, right? Like I would take a score on that. And really, or students would have to write a summary of every chapter, because summary had a high effect size. Guess what? That kind of stuff, that there is no better way to kill engagement than make kids do things that are not real world and relevant. Like I could tell if kids were understanding a story through a conversation, through listening to them talk in their book clubs, through studying their readers' notebooks. I didn't need them to fill out a comprehension packet. I didn't need them to write me a summary. I could have had them write me a summary of the text of the book at the end, but I was thinking the more the better, right? And so when I study things when I go in classrooms, thankfully that didn't last long. I stopped that practice early in my career. But thankfully, thinking about what we're asking students to do, when I'm in a book club or I'm reading a book, I like to talk to people about it. I like to jot down my thoughts. I like to kind of process my thinking in my notebook. Those are best practices. Those are real world relevant things. And so I work with kindergartners and we teach them how to do those kinds of things, how to jot their thoughts down, how to have conversations about the books they're reading. Materials are current. I recently was doing lab sites in a district. And so I was going in and teaching, and teachers were watching me teach, and then I would teach them as I was teaching students, right? And so one thing that I noticed was in this particular building that kids really didn't do their independent reading. And so I teach a lot of different things, but I'll talk a lot about probably reading and writing because it's relevant to this particular professional learning. So I noticed that students weren't really engaged in independent reading. And so as I was studying their book boxes, I noticed that they had lots of really old books that were kind of tattered. Some of the nonfiction books were books literally that were used when I was in school, and that was a long time ago. I saw a lot of like paper books that were just printed, not just, but they were printed off, and students didn't have like current exciting books in their book boxes that would make them want to read. They didn't have like the series books that get you hooked as a reader. And so these are things that are really helpful to help set that urgency to the work, to make it real world and relevant. And another thing about every minute is precious and there's an urgency to do the work is teacher excitement, that they believe in what they're doing and what they're asking to do. So setting this kind of tone in your classroom is a point, or in a classroom is a 0.62 effect size. So remember that 0.40 is a year. 0.662 is well over a year. It's really important. Next, students are given tips and tools they can use with independence and agency. So sometimes that word agency is kind of a new term that people get thrown out. And really that means that students have choice, that they have voice, and that what they're using, the materials, the curriculum is matched to them. Like it's exciting to them. They have bought in on it. And so this has a 0.75 effect size. This is big, it's huge. And so what it looks like to me when I go in classrooms is I notice that students might have different materials or different tools. So when I say different materials, we might have students in book clubs, right? So let's go back to book clubs for just a second. So if they're in book clubs, some students are reading the books. Some students are listening to audio. Some students might be reading that same book on a digital device. When I think about tools that students have, I'll notice that they might have tools that are different progressions, like a reading progression or a different writing progression. Sometimes it's on their grade level and sometimes it's a different grade level. I also notice that sometimes students might have progressions that are illustrated with pictures and picture support, which is really critical, especially for our students with dyslexia, for our students with in special education, and for our EL students, or students who are speakers of other languages. So I'll notice those kinds of things. I'll notice students on different text levels. And so not everyone's using the same book, right? And then I'll notice like different decodable text levels inside their book baggies or their book boxes, book bins, whatever you want to talk, say about that. So they would have decodable text that are appropriate to the reading level that they are as an independent reader. And I'll also notice that they might have sight words in their book boxes, their book bins, in their book baggies that are appropriate to the reader that they are. Some students, I'll also notice, depending on their level, they might have an ABC chart if they're still working on that phonemic awareness and haven't quite gotten that mastered to the point of some of the other more phonics kind of work. So some tips for this that could help build students to have tips and tools that they can use with independency and independence and agency are offering choice. So they can have choice on things like the types of books that they're reading, or so it could be the types of books. It could be the mode of them reading the books. It could be paper choice. Paper choice is one of the most powerful ways to differentiate writing instruction. So one of the things, I'm going to go way off here, guys, for just a second, but I can't help it. So one of the things that you might have paper choice that has a big box and a line, or paper choice that has a little bit smaller and a couple of lines. Then we start to move where maybe there's a box there and more lines, to paper that has lots of lines, into like a notebook with even more lines, right? Oh, you can't see that. So paper choice, what I've done before, I'll give you an example. I was in 3rd grade, and I was in 3rd grade teaching a writing workshop lesson, and a student was just completely shut down. So this particular student, the whole class was in writer's notebooks. And guess what? When I see that everyone's using the same materials, I'm like, that sends off like a little flag for me. So every kid was using these writer's notebooks, and honestly, like, it was just overwhelming for him. He couldn't even think about, all he saw were all the lines. He couldn't even think about what to write. So what I did with that, so that it would be beneficial for him, was instead of totally switching out the paper that felt more primary to him, I took Post-its and put it on the paper. Okay, so he still had lines, but a lot of them were covered up. And I'm like, draw out the first thing that happened, draw it. The second thing that happened, draw it. The third thing that happened, draw it. And he was able to take his time. He got started immediately, and he started drawing. And then I came back to him after I conferenced with another student, and he had those drawn out. I said, now I want you to write about that here, and then write about that here, and write about that here. And it was a step that felt very doable to him. He wasn't as overwhelmed by that notebook. And I just taught him a strategy that could work on the next page of his notebook and the next page. So I try to teach strategies that are transferable too. So that was something that helped him. Another thing that you can offer choice on is topic. So maybe you could have students writing about doing research argumentative papers, but they get to choose the topic that they want to do it on, or they get to choose the type of book clubs that they want to be in, or they get to choose the types of nonfiction books that they want to be in. They get choice in that. Something else that we do is offer choice with checklists. So checklists with pictures, with words, with levels, and then set different kinds of goals, and kids get to set those types of goals that they want for being independent, or the kind of work that they want to do. All right, fun, fun, fun. Oh, I can leave it like that. Sorry about that, guys. Next, let's do some more. Student conversations are supportive, and the feedback they give each other is helpful. So that effect size is 0.74. And so when I go into classrooms and notice students working in partnerships, some of the things that I look for are students talking about the work that they're doing. So as they're talking about the work that they're doing, are they sharing tips with each other? Like, you could try this. I tried this and it worked really well. And so you'll notice our students sharing tips. Are they reminding one another of previous learning? So when I talked with you earlier about the real estate in the classroom is the walls. And so you want to be really smart about what you have on the walls. So as I go into a classroom, I notice what's on the walls because that should tell me what's been taught. And students should be able to look at and say, remember, and point to an anchor chart or something in the classroom that's going to help them remember what they've been taught, so their previous learning. Another thing that you can do to help students' conversations is to model. Give examples of what that conversation should look like. And I also do things like give kids tools to help support them in their talk with their partnerships. So I might give them the anchor chart and just kind of shrink it down for them and say, okay, you can ask your partner, like, where did you try this strategy? Or where did you try this strategy? Or I tried this strategy and it didn't work very well. So I think I'm going to try this other strategy that my teacher taught me or that you taught me. Or I have students pull out their checklists or their rubrics, and they together go through their work or practice different parts of the rubrics and give examples of how they could do that work. So tools can be really helpful for kids, especially if they struggle in partnerships. Now, what I do not recommend is every single kid or every single partnership don't need the same tools. So be really intentional about giving out tools to help kids in their independent reading and independent writing, because you want them to be purposeful and for them to use them. If they all have the same ones and they keep getting more and more and more, they're not going to be used. So just a little tip for you, found out the hard way. Next, what are some tips to help me with this? Explicitly teach how to get feedback. And one of the things that I do is I always ask, I say, can I give you a compliment? And they always say yes. I tell them exactly what they did. Like my language matches the strategy. As a reader, I noticed you have lots and lots of books that you've been reading, right? So I like to compliment on habits. That might be, and that's what readers do. Readers, lifelong readers, read lots and lots of books, and I notice that you're doing that. May I give you a tip? And so I always ask if I can give a tip, and then I give them a tip. Then I teach it to them and I have them practice it. So what you can do is have students learn how to kind of mimic some of the things that you're doing. So as a writer, I noticed that you're doing this, and that's really important because, and can I give you a tip? Or I even tell kids like, hey, what you could do is say, I need this. Or I'll ask questions like, what would you like help on? Those can be some things that just kind of help set the tone for giving feedback. Another thing is I teach students how to use the resources in the classroom when it comes to giving feedback. So look at the anchor charts, remember the strategies, look at your checklist, look at your rubrics. Those are things that have the language for us, or mentor text that we've marked up. Look at those things and use those to help with your feedback, to give examples so they can see what you're talking about. And then I teach students like, how do I ask for feedback or help? Now, if somebody's working really hard on something, you might need to ask them if you could set an appointment, like your writing partnership or your reading partner. Like, can I set an appointment to meet with you after you finish this big work that you're doing right now? And I need some help. I'm sort of stuck. So that would be an appropriate way to ask for feedback. All right, let's keep going. That 0.74, I'm not sure if I told you guys that or not, but on the effect size. So it's really high as well. Next, sticking with student conversations. Student conversations lead students to go back to their work or take it in a completely different direction. So it'll lead them to return to their work. So if they're stuck, or to help them take their work in a completely different direction. Like, I totally hadn't even thought about that. That's a great idea. I'm going to go back and try that right now. And so this looks like a student is no longer stuck, and a student goes back and they try the tip that they just got. So as they're having a conversation with their partners or they're getting great ideas, it helps them like generate more thoughts or more strategies that they can try as a reader or a writer. How do you teach kids this? Well, we teach it explicitly, how to help or give feedback. When can you do this? I do this in whole group as a class. I do this in partnerships. So a small group, I might pull reading partners or writing partners, especially if I notice in my data as I'm observing them, if I notice that they're really struggling as a partnership, I'll pull them up and do some of that work. In my teaching share time of my block, I will go back and teach students this explicitly. And at times I'll do a mid-workshop teaching point if I notice that students are kind of waning on their stamina, and I'll go in and teach them, like, readers or writers, you know what you can do with your writing partner or your reading partner, and I'll teach them a strategy of how they can help support each other. All right, we'll keep going. Some more qualitative data that we can study, right? All students are working with success and independence. And this is key. This is so important, because the only way we can help readers and writers grow is if we meet them where they are through responsive teaching, and they actually go practice the things and do the things that we've been teaching them. They're not going to improve as a reader or a writer unless they can go do this independently and do it successfully. And that has a 0.92 effect size. Huge, huge. All right. So how does this look? Students are engaged and they're on task. So I don't mean compliant. I mean, they're actually doing the reading and the reading work, and they're actually doing the writing and the writing work. And students know what to do when they get stuck. So we want to help them break the dependency cycle that really we actually feed into students becoming dependent on us. So I'll talk to you really quickly. I could go on and on about this, about the dependency cycle and us breaking that. Students are dependent on us when we're teaching them, like maybe the mini lessons, small groups, conferences, those kinds of things. We send them off to go be independent readers and writers, right? And then suddenly they get stuck and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. And so that shows up a couple of different ways. Like if I'm working with middle school and high school kids in really intermediate, they'll just shut down. They'll just shut down. They won't do anything, right? Or they'll put their head down, or I'll have a behavior, or any grade level, they have to go to the bathroom, or they're walking around, or they're fiddling with their stuff, or they're under their desk. Littles will like make this big trail that just follows their teacher around. But we don't want that to happen. We don't want them to be stuck, because what they want to do is they become dependent, because a lot of times we swoop in and we fix it. We fix it for them. And so our goal is to break this dependency cycle and help them get unstuck so that they can be independent again. And so we want to teach them that they have silent teachers in the classroom. They don't need me, right? They don't need you. You have all of these things in here that can help you as a reader and writer so that you're independent. They have tools, right? So you've given them checklists, you've given them anchor charts, they are on the wall, the anchor charts are on the wall. They might see mentor text. They might see repertoire charts where you have lots of different strategies for kids to be able to analyze how character changes from the beginning of the story until the end of the story. All of those things are tools, okay? Checklists, rubrics, I told those two. Anchor charts, yeah. They have reading partners, writing partners, They have partnerships that can help them. They have charts. They have mentor texts. These are things that are going to give them clues of things that they could do so that they're no longer stuck and they get to independence. So it's really key, critical that we teach kids how they can work successfully and independently, doing the kind of work that they need to become a better reader and a better writer. We'll keep going. I could talk clearly for days on this. You should notice that students' work is clearly changing over time. So one of the things that I'll do is if I study students writing folders in primary, what I should see is depending on when they've started a particular unit, I should see that folders are getting heavy. There's a lot of volume writing in there. As I look in students' writers' notebooks, I notice the amount of entries, the number of pages that students are working on. So one of the things that I study to see it change over time is I'm noticing volume. As I study their book bins or like reading logs, I should see that the different kinds of books that they're reading are getting more challenging and that they're reading lots and lots of books, right? When I study student writing, I should see that their revising is becoming more sophisticated. I should notice that they are using punctuation in more interesting ways. So I'm looking to see what has the teacher been teaching in this classroom. And typically I should be able to see that by studying the walls because there should be evidence of the types of strategies that have been taught. And then I look inside readers' notebooks, writers' notebooks, writing folders, and look for tracks of the teaching that, oh my gosh, I can see that they learned how to show, not tell in their writing because all of a sudden they started doing this little strategy where they were talking about the dialogue that was happening inside the head versus the dialogue that was happening when they were actually speaking, right? And so those would be things that you should notice when we see that students' work is changing over time. So I'm studying for tracks of teaching that's evident. I also look for change in volume and change in levels. Volume reading, volume writing is critical. It's key in order to help students move along a reading continuum, along a writing continuum. Practice, practice, practice on the right things using the right tools. Okay, so what are some tips? Check in with students. So I know how busy everyone is, but a lot of times kids know if we're going to check their work or not, or if we're going to like be studying, holding them accountable to be doing this work. And so how I check their work is through conferences. So reading conferences, writing conferences, small groups, their partners, their reading and writing partners, or other people in the classroom to help hold one another accountable. Another thing that you can do is study student work like as a PLC. So in small groups or PLCs, we'll just grab just some random student work and then be studying that together, holding students accountable. And then I highlight what I notice how students' work is changing. So that could be a teaching share, that could be a mid-workshop teaching point. It could be my mini lesson for the day, is that I've been noticing that we talked the other day about how to show, not tell. And I noticed this in 3 people's writers' notebooks, and I'm going to have them come share that with us today. So I highlight what I want to see more and more and more of. Teach students to study exemplars, like other pieces of writing or other things that writers do, and then go back and try that in their work. And that is a 0.86. And so one of the things, the way that looks to me is I notice students revision or their editing of their writing, and I study notebooks to see how their thinking changes. I also study like Post-its and jot thoughts that students do in their reading and notice how their thinking's changing as they have learned or studied the way other people's thinking has been changing. So I model for students some tips. Model for students how to use exemplars. You have to model this a lot, not a little. So a couple of times a week for a little while until it becomes automatic, and highlight it when students do it. Remind them over and over again. One of the tools that they have in their classroom is studying exemplars. Here's something else, another piece of qualitative data. You can say that was at 0.86, and this is a 0.86 as well. Students are doing different work while they read a book. And so you'll see them studying parts of a book, like at the beginning, other things in the middle, and then other things in the end. So an example could be at the beginning. What you'll notice is they know the character, or they know the title, they know the author, and maybe some things about characters. As they get to the middle of the book, their thinking starts to change. So they're starting to make some interesting predictions based on clues that they've been seeing. And then as they get to the end of the book, they might say, oh my gosh, the theme of this story is, or a lesson that I learned in this book is this. And so their thinking changes from the beginning of the book until the end of the book. And one of the ways, and really both of these could go together, one for writing, one for reading, but study students' notebooks, study their jot thoughts, study their conversations. Like, notice how they're applying different strategies and how they're talking as they navigate their way through a book. In order to do this, students are going to need lots of modeling. So model a lot for them. Show them examples. Like, give them examples of how you or another student has done this work. More qualitative data to study. You had no idea, did you? I didn't either. It's taken 20 years to get here. Another thing to think about is that students work on big goals. So goals that are big enough to draw like flexibility on, they need to be really flexible with and draw on lots of strategies. And this is a 0.68 effect size. So one thing that I think about, this looks like students have multiple strategies to try. So maybe as they're, I'll go back to, let me go back to how a character changes from the beginning of the story until the end. They might have 3 or 4 different strategies of things that they notice, or how they can show not tell in their writing. And so they want to do revision work in their writing. And one of the ways that they want to revise is through show not tell. So they could do dialogues, they could do the conversation, they could do inner dialogue, like what's happening in the mind. They could talk about emotion and express emotion. They could talk about, they could write about actions, the action that's happening. So when they think about revision and that they want to bring the character to life, they have multiple strategies to draw upon in order to make that happen, right? Something that I always like to remind people is that we use those multiple strategies not in one book or on one writing piece. It can be applied to multiple things, right? So you never want it to be about the one piece of writing that they're doing right now. We want to look at them as a writer and not the writing. So we teach the writer, not the writing. We're not trying to get them to just apply it in this one piece. And so you have to be broader in your language, and you have to show them how it transfers to other things. So tips for this: explicitly teach strategies to students that blank, whatever that big goal is. Help them generate ideas to reach that goal, like right now. So this is what your goal is, like you're setting your goal. What are some things you could do as a reader? What are some things you could do as a writer? Well, I could read more books. I could use this decoding strategy, these 3 decoding strategies to help me when I get stuck. You know, they could come up with lots of different ways. And then check in with them. Lots of times we don't really check in and check to make sure that students are actually doing the work. Now, another thing, teacher feedback. All right, so teacher feedback has an effect size of 0.70, really high. And so how that looks when I'm studying this kind of data is I notice the feedback that's happening in conferences, in small groups. I notice that it's really targeted. It's telling students where they are and what their next step is. That feedback teaches the students the strategy, shows them how it looks, and then has the students actually try it right there. This is tough. And so one of my tips is I practice this in my PLCs. I practice this in lab sites. I practice this with coaching, practice this with people. So just like I told you, I kind of have a strategy is that I give students a compliment. I ask if I can give them a compliment, and it's on, I name and notice exactly what they see. I see that they do as a reader or a writer. And then I ask them, can I give you a tip? And then I teach them something and I model it, how to do it. I show them what that looks like and then have them try it out, have them practice it. And I don't have them practice it one time, I have them practice it 2 times and in different spaces so that they can see transference and we can just keep an eye on it before they go out. So teacher feedback is critical. Last one. I hope you walk away just like with, wow, I think I gave you 11 different things to observe or consider taking analytical data on. So it's quite a lot. Students regularly assess themselves and decide their next steps. Self-assessment is well over a year at 1.33. So them being able to self-assess themselves, they do that through looking at studying their work against checklists, rubrics, student exemplars, other work, examples that we've shared with them. They say, where am I and what is my next step? That's how that looks. And then a tip to be able to do this is model how to do it. Talk about it with students in conferences. You could model how to do that in mid-workshop teaching. You could do that in teaching shares. You could do that as a whole group. Partnerships can do this together where they assess regularly, do self-assessment, and then decide their next steps. I don't even know what to say except, whew, that's where I'm at right now. Woo! I'll share with you my little person there, right? I think when I think about this, I wonder a couple of things. When we take this analytic, like this qualitative data, not analytical data, I apologize, I said that like 2 times or 3 times. When we take this qualitative data, does it match our quantitative data? Are we seeing a correlation there? And so we can use this knowledge from the qualitative data and decide, do we need to update our resources? Do we need to update our practices? Might we need to update our learning, some professional development? Some other things I think about is that this is applicable to all content areas. It's not just applicable to reading and writing. I worked with high school social or science and they were like, oh my gosh, we can use this in science. And I said, yes, you can. We just change out a couple of the things, but it's applicable across all things, studying qualitative data. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for watching and joining me on this amazing day. Hope you have a great conference. I apologize that I said analytical data a couple of times instead of qualitative data. I think it's probably because it's 10 o'clock at night. So wishing you the absolute best. Do not hesitate to reach out at Carrie Hepburn or Carrie at Compass PD. Have a great day.